From the very first note, the crowd was silent. You could hear a pin drop. Even Simon Cowell, known for his stoic, unshakable demeanor, leaned forward in his chair with an expression that no one had ever seen before. This was not just another audition. This was a moment that would linger in everyone's memory forever. And it all began with a boy from a small town in the Philippines, carrying a dream so big, it could fill an entire stadium. Meet Mateo, a 16-year-old with an extraordinary voice and an unassuming smile. Born in a humble neighborhood, his world was filled with narrow streets, bustling markets, and the rhythmic hum of everyday life. Music wasn't just a hobby for Mateo, it was his escape, his way of speaking when words failed him. From a young age, he had fallen in love with Elvis Presley, studying every performance, memorizing every note, and dreaming of the day he could stand on a stage where millions could hear him. But dreams like Mateo's don't come easily. He faced skepticism, both from people who loved him and those who couldn't imagine a small-town boy reaching beyond his limits. His father, a hard-working man, worried about the uncertainty of a music career. His mother, gentle and encouraging, reminded him to always chase what made his heart sing. And Mateo himself wrestled with the fear that his voice, though powerful, might not be enough to impress the world. When he got the call for the auditions of one of the biggest talent shows in the world, Mateo's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and terror. The moment he stepped onto the grand stage, under the bright lights, his nerves threatened to take over. The audience buzzed with anticipation, the judges exchanged polite smiles, and Simon Cowell, famous for his unyielding critiques, watched silently, arms crossed. Mateo took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and imagined himself back in his tiny room in the Philippines, practicing for hours with nothing but a mirror and his dreams for company. And then, he sang. The first note rang out like sunlight breaking through clouds. His voice carried warmth, depth, and a nostalgic resonance that transported everyone back in time. It wasn't just a performance, it was a story of years of dedication, of late nights and early mornings, of courage in the face of doubt. The audience gasped. The camera captured every flicker of Simon Cowell's face. His mouth slightly open, eyes widening, a rare, unguarded reaction emerging from the man who had seen it all. Mateo's voice hit every note with precision, but it was the emotion, the soul, that silenced everyone in the theater. For the first time, Simon didn't interrupt, didn't critique. He simply listened, mesmerized, as if time itself had paused to witness this moment. Mateo's hands trembled slightly, but his heart soared. He could feel the connection, the invisible thread tying him to every listener, every dreamer who had ever been told their dreams were too big. By the final note, the audience erupted into applause, some on their feet, some with tears in their eyes. And Simon Cowell, known for his sharp tongue and critical eye, stood and clapped, not just politely, but with genuine amazement. He leaned toward the microphone and said words that would change Mateo's life forever. "I've never heard anything like that." Backstage, Mateo's knees shook, but he smiled through tears. This was more than validation, it was proof that passion, persistence, and belief in oneself could move mountains. But the journey didn't end there. Simon invited him to mentor sessions, gave him advice on connecting with the audience, and challenged him to push his artistry even further. Mateo learned that talent alone wasn't enough, courage, humility, and resilience were equally vital. Through each round of the competition, Mateo's story spread far beyond the stage. Social media erupted with clips of the performance, trending worldwide. Viewers from every corner of the globe were inspired by this small-town boy who dared to dream. And yet, Mateo remained grounded, remembering his mother's words, "Your voice is powerful, but your heart is what truly moves people." Every note he sang carried that heart, touching not just the audience in the theater but millions online, proving that music has no borders. The finale came, and Mateo stood under the spotlight, no longer the nervous boy who first walked onto that stage, but a young artist transformed. The applause was deafening, the judges' smiles wide, but the most profound moment was the shared understanding that dreams, no matter how improbable, could be realized. Mateo's journey reminded everyone watching that true talent is nurtured by passion, tested by obstacles, and celebrated through courage. As he took his final bow, tears glistening in his eyes, Mateo knew this was only the beginning. Simon Cowell, rarely seen moved to such emotion, gave him a nod that said more than words ever could: this boy was destined to inspire the world. And in that moment, the message was clear, not just for aspiring singers, but for anyone who has ever doubted themselves, believe, work hard, and let your heart guide you. Because sometimes, a single voice can leave the world speechless. So if Mateo's journey moved you, if his courage and talent inspired you to believe in your own dreams, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little spark today. And subscribe to the channel for more stories that will touch your heart and remind you that greatness can come from anywhere, even the smallest corners of the world. From the moment Mateo stepped onto the stage, the world seemed to hold its breath. The lights were blinding, the audience buzzing with excitement, but all Mateo could hear was the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Every step felt heavy yet purposeful, a journey that had started years ago in a small, bustling neighborhood in the Philippines. In his tiny room, surrounded by posters of Elvis Presley, he had spent countless nights singing into the mirror, imagining a stage much bigger than he could ever have seen. Back then, it was just him and his dreams, a voice echoing through empty walls, hoping that someday someone would hear not just the notes, but the heart behind them. And now, here he was, on one of the biggest stages in the world, under the eyes of millions, facing the most intimidating judge of them all, Simon Cowell. As Mateo lifted the microphone, his fingers trembled slightly. He glanced briefly at the audience, then closed his eyes and let the music flow through him. The first note broke the silence like sunlight piercing storm clouds. It wasn't just a sound, it was an emotional wave that carried years of dedication, struggle, and hope. The audience froze, caught in the beauty of a voice that seemed to transcend time. Simon Cowell, who had seen hundreds, if not thousands, of singers, leaned forward in his chair, eyes widening in disbelief. This was a reaction rarely seen from a man famous for his sharp critiques. Mateo's voice didn't just imitate Elvis, it captured the soul, the warmth, and the nostalgia of a legend, while carrying his own unique emotional signature. The audience gasped as he hit each note flawlessly, but it was the raw honesty behind every word that left them speechless. Backstage, memories of his journey flashed before him as he sang. He remembered the long walks to school, humming tunes just to feel alive. He remembered the nights when he would practice quietly so as not to disturb his neighbors, the moments when doubt crept in and told him his dreams were impossible. His father's worried voice, his mother's gentle encouragement, the sacrifices, the tears, all of it fused into this performance. Mateo's voice became more than a song, it became a story, a testament to resilience, to the power of believing in oneself even when the odds seem insurmountable. Every note he sang was a heartbeat, echoing the courage it took to come this far. As the final note lingered in the theater, a silence heavier than any applause filled the room. And then, it happened. Simon Cowell, the man who had scowled and criticized for decades, stood and clapped. Not politely, not out of obligation, but with genuine awe and admiration. His words, simple yet powerful, broke the tension. "I've never heard anything like that." The applause erupted, filling every corner of the stage, the seats, and even the hearts of those watching at home. Mateo's knees shook, but a radiant smile spread across his face. He had done it. He had turned years of quiet practice, endless doubts, and unwavering passion into a moment that would live forever in the memory of everyone who witnessed it. After the performance, Simon invited Mateo for mentoring sessions. He taught him about stage presence, connecting with the audience, and the subtle art of making each performance unforgettable. Mateo absorbed every lesson, realizing that talent alone could only take him so far. It was courage, humility, and the ability to move people emotionally that made a true performer. Meanwhile, clips of his performance spread across social media, going viral almost instantly. Millions of viewers were captivated by the story of a small-town Filipino boy whose voice reminded the world that dreams can come from anywhere. Comments poured in from across the globe, praising his talent, his dedication, and his heart. Yet, Mateo remained grounded, never forgetting the love and guidance of his family, and the countless hours spent perfecting his craft in a tiny room that felt worlds away from this glittering stage. As the competition progressed, Mateo faced new challenges, the pressure of expectations, the nerves that threatened to return, and the constant reminder that the journey was far from over. Each round tested not just his vocal ability, but his resilience. And each time, he rose to the occasion, transforming fear into energy, doubts into determination. His performances became less so. The lights of the stage felt like 1,000 suns pressing down on Mateo as he stepped forward. His heart raced so fast it almost drowned out the cheering of the audience. All around him, the set sparkled in golds and reds, but all he could see was the familiar image of his mother's encouraging smile, the worn posters of Elvis Presley in his bedroom, and the streets of his small Philippine town where he had first discovered the magic of music. Every step toward the microphone carried the weight of his dreams, years of practice, and countless times he had been told that maybe, just maybe, he was reaching too far. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves, feeling the smooth metal of the microphone in his hands, and whispered to himself, "This is it. This is my moment." Back in his tiny room, it had all started with a guitar he barely knew how to tune and a voice that trembled when he first tried to sing like Elvis. He remembered late nights, sitting on the edge of his bed, singing to empty walls, imagining a crowd of thousands listening to every note. His father often shook his head, worried that his son was chasing a dream too big for their humble life. But his mother, gentle and warm, would place her hand on his shoulder and tell him, "Sing, Mateo. Sing like the world is listening, because one day, it will." Those words had stayed with him through years of self-doubt, teasing from peers, and the countless small failures that made him question if he was good enough. Now, standing on this enormous stage, he realized that every hardship had led him here. The first note left his lips, and the room froze. It wasn't just a sound, it was a living, breathing story. The audience leaned forward as if trying to catch every ounce of emotion in his voice. Mateo's tone carried the warmth of nostalgia, the heartbreak of struggle, and the joy of finally daring to dream. Simon Cowell, who had watched the most extraordinary talents the world had to offer, shifted in his chair. His usually impassive face was momentarily transformed, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly agape. Mateo poured himself into the music, closing his eyes, letting each note carry the memory of his past, the sacrifices of his family, and the endless hours of practice. The stage lights glimmered across his features, highlighting the determination etched into his young face. Mateo's mind drifted to all the mornings he had woken before dawn to practice, to the nights he had sung until his voice grew hoarse, to the times he had nearly given up because the world seemed too big for a boy from a small neighborhood. Yet here he was, and the voice that had once echoed only against the walls of his tiny room now filled the grand theater, touching hearts he had never even met. The audience didn't just hear him, they felt him. Each word carried weight, each melody spoke of hope, and every rise and fall of his voice seemed to whisper, "No dream is too impossible if you believe." As he hit the final note of the first verse, the entire theater was silent, the kind of silence that stretches and makes you hold your breath. Simon leaned forward, unblinking, clearly caught in a rare moment of awe. Mateo's hands trembled, but he didn't stop. He continued into the chorus, his voice soaring, trembling, powerful. He imagined the streets of his hometown, the market where he had sung for tips as a child, the encouragement of friends who believed in him even when he doubted himself. He remembered the faces of those who had laughed at his dreams and felt the determination swell within him. Every note was a statement, a promise to himself and the world, he would not let fear win. The song reached its climax, and Mateo's eyes glistened with tears, the result of emotion and relief flooding through him. Simon Cowell, known for his steely judgment and rare compliments, finally broke the silence with a standing ovation. His words were simple, yet they carried monumental weight. "I've never heard anything like that." The audience erupted, applause shaking the theater. Mateo's knees threatened to give way beneath him, but he smiled, a mixture of pride, disbelief, and humility. He realized in that instant that all the struggles, doubts, and hard work had culminated in this magical moment of recognition. Not just for talent, but for heart, passion, and persistence. Backstage, Mateo was overwhelmed. The buzzing of lights, voices, and cameras felt distant compared to the flood of memories in his mind. He thought of his parents, their sacrifices, and the unwavering belief they had placed in him. Simon approached, offering advice, mentorship, and encouragement. He told Mateo that the true power of a performance wasn't just technical skill, it was connection, emotion, authenticity. Mateo listened intently, knowing that the journey had only begun. The world had seen his talent, but it was his heart that would carry him further than any stage, any competition, or any viral moment ever could. The days that followed were a whirlwind of performances, interviews, and social media reactions. Clips of his audition went viral, inspiring millions around the globe. People commented on his authenticity, his courage, and the sheer beauty of his voice. Mateo remained grounded, remembering the streets of his hometown, the room where it all began, and the voice of his mother reminding him that music was not about fame, it was about touching hearts. He sang every song with passion, giving his audience not just entertainment, but a story of resilience, hope, and belief. Every note carried the weight of his journey, and viewers around the world could feel it in their own hearts. Finally, the night of the grand finale arrived. Mateo stood in the center of the stage, lights dazzling, audience roaring, cameras capturing every angle. He no longer felt nervous, he felt ready. Every note he sang that night carried the story of a boy who dared to dream bigger than the world told him he could. Tears streamed down faces in the audience, and even Simon Cowell's expression softened into awe and admiration. The applause after his final bow was deafening, but the most profound feeling was the knowledge that Mateo had proven something far greater than talent. It was that courage, heart, and dedication could truly move the world. Mateo's journey is more than a story about a boy who sings like Elvis, it is a lesson for anyone who has ever doubted themselves. It is proof that no matter how small your beginnings, how impossible your dreams may seem, or how harsh the world may be, with belief, passion, and perseverance, you can touch hearts, inspire millions, and leave a lasting mark on the world. His story reminds us all that greatness doesn't come from fame alone, it comes from heart, courage, and the willingness to step onto the stage of life and give everything you have. So if Mateo's journey moved you, if his courage inspired you to chase your own dreams, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a spark of hope. And subscribe to the channel for more stories that will touch your heart and remind you that sometimes, a single voice isn't just heard, it changes the world. Because the next great story, the next extraordinary talent, could be anyone, anywhere, maybe even you. The stage lights blazed down like a sun frozen in time, illuminating every corner of the theater with a golden glow. Mateo stood at the edge, tiny in comparison to the grandeur around him, yet carrying a presence far bigger than his 16 years. He could hear the distant murmur of the audience, the low hum of excitement, and the faint click of cameras capturing moments he could hardly believe were real. He swallowed hard and closed his eyes, letting his mind drift back to the narrow streets of his hometown in the Philippines, where the air always smelled of sizzling street food and rain-washed concrete. That's where it had all started, a small boy with an oversized dream and a voice that refused to be quiet, even when the world told him to tone it down. In his room, walls plastered with posters of Elvis Presley, Mateo had spent countless nights practicing in secret. The neighbors might have thought he was just humming to himself, but each note carried his hopes, his fears, and the story of every sacrifice his family had made. His father, stern but loving, often shook his head at the audacity of his dreams, worried that the world would be cruel to a small-town boy. His mother, however, with a soft smile and hands calloused from years of work, had always whispered, "Sing, Mateo. Let the world hear your heart." That small phrase had echoed in his mind through every moment of self-doubt, every time he wondered if he was reaching too far. And now, standing under these lights, it all came together, the culmination of every tear, every late night, every ounce of courage he had summoned. He stepped forward. The microphone felt heavy in his hands, yet familiar. Mateo took a slow breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing on him. The audience leaned forward, and even Simon Cowell, who had seen every possible kind of performance, watched with that cold, calculating stare he always wore. Mateo's heart hammered, threatening to drown out the music in his mind. But then, he imagined his small room back home, the mirror that reflected a boy daring to dream, and he let go. The first note left his lips, soft at first, trembling slightly, but then it grew in strength, resonating through the theater, carrying the story of a boy who refused to be invisible. The room fell silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle, not a murmur, just the pure, electric sound of his voice. Mateo sang not just with technique, but with soul, weaving years of longing and practice into every syllable. Memories flashed before his eyes, waking up before sunrise to practice, rehearsing in secret to avoid criticism, watching videos of Elvis Presley and trying to capture the magic he felt as. From the very first second he walked onto that stage, something felt different. The light shimmered like 1,000 stars above him, the audience buzzed with anticipation, and the judges sat waiting with expressions they had worn 1,000 times before. But this time would not be ordinary. This time, a 16-year-old boy from a small town in the Philippines was about to do something no one expected. And by the end of it, even Simon Cowell, the man known for his cold honesty and impossible standards, would struggle to find words. Mateo had grown up in a narrow street where children played basketball with broken hoops and neighbors knew each other by name. His house was small, the paint slightly faded, but inside it lived a dream too big for its walls. On one side of his tiny bedroom hung posters of Elvis Presley. To many, they were just decorations. To Mateo, they were windows into a world far beyond his own. Every night, he would stand in front of a cracked mirror, using a hairbrush as a microphone, singing with a passion that shook the quiet room. He wasn't just copying Elvis. He was feeling every lyric, every rise and fall of emotion, imagining himself on a stage where people truly listened. But dreams are never easy. His father worried constantly. "Music is not a stable life," he would say, his voice heavy with concern. He wasn't trying to crush Mateo's dreams, he was trying to protect him from heartbreak. His mother, however, saw something in her son's eyes every time he sang. She saw fire. She saw belief. Late at night, when doubt crept into Mateo's heart, she would sit beside him and whisper, "If God gave you this voice, don't be afraid to use it." Those words became his armor against fear. When the opportunity came to audition for one of the world's biggest talent shows, Mateo felt excitement and terror colliding inside him. The journey from his small town to that massive international stage felt unreal. On the plane ride, he stared out the window at the clouds, wondering if he truly belonged in this new world. He thought about the sacrifices his parents made to support him. He thought about the neighbors who cheered him on. He thought about the ones who laughed. And somewhere deep inside, he made a promise: no matter what happened, he would sing with everything he had. Standing on that stage for the first time, he felt the weight of thousands of eyes. The spotlight hit his face, warm and blinding. Simon Cowell sat at the judges' table, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Mateo had watched Simon on television for years. He knew the reputation. Brutally honest. Nearly impossible to impress. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he introduced himself, his voice slightly shaking. The audience offered polite applause. Nothing special yet. Nothing unforgettable until he opened his mouth to sing. The first note floated into the air softly, almost fragile. For a split second, time seemed to pause. Then his voice grew stronger, richer, filled with a depth no one expected from a teenager. It wasn't just technically impressive. It was emotional. It carried pain, hope, longing, and strength all at once. The tone was hauntingly reminiscent of Elvis Presley, yet uniquely his own. The audience leaned forward. A woman in the front row covered her mouth in shock. A man blinked rapidly, holding back tears. Simon shifted in his seat. His eyebrows lifted slightly. That alone was rare. As the second verse began, Mateo closed his eyes. He wasn't in the theater anymore. He was back in his bedroom, singing to the mirror. He was back in the street where neighbors clapped for him. He was back in every moment someone told him he couldn't do it. And with each note, he proved them wrong. His voice soared higher, smoother, more powerful. It wrapped around the room like a wave, washing over everyone in its path. The chorus hit, and it was explosive. Mateo poured his soul into it. You could see it in the tension of his jaw, the tremble in his hands, the fire in his expression. The performance was no longer an audition, it was a declaration. It said, "I am here. I matter. My dream matters." The audience erupted mid-song, unable to contain their amazement. But Mateo didn't break. He kept going, pushing even deeper into the emotion of the song. Cameras zoomed in on Simon Cowell. His arms were no longer crossed. He was leaning forward, elbows on the desk, eyes locked on the stage. There was something in his expression, something almost childlike. Surprise. Admiration. Disbelief. This was the reaction viewers rarely saw. This was the reaction that meant something extraordinary was happening. As Mateo approached the final note, the entire theater felt electric. The band softened, giving him space. He held the note longer than anyone expected, his voice steady and crystal clear. It rang through the hall like a bell announcing something historic. And when he finally let it go, silence followed. Deep, stunned silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the explosion came. The audience jumped to their feet. Cheers thundered through the building. Some people were crying openly. Others simply stood there, shaking their heads in disbelief. Mateo stood frozen, breathing heavily, trying to understand what had just happened. And then he saw it. Simon Cowell was standing. Clapping. Not slowly. Not politely. But genuinely, almost passionately. When Simon finally spoke, his voice carried unusual softness. "I've been doing this for a long time," he said. "And very rarely does someone surprise me like that." The crowd roared again. Mateo's eyes filled with tears. Years of doubt, struggle, and silent practice had led to this moment. This wasn't just approval. It was validation. Backstage, he broke down in his mother's arms. Cameras captured the raw emotion on his face. "We did it," he whispered. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The competition would get tougher. Expectations would grow heavier. Pressure would intensify. Yet something inside him had changed. He no longer questioned whether he belonged. He knew he did. As the weeks passed, Mateo continued to deliver performances that stunned audiences worldwide. Each round pushed him further. There were nights he felt exhausted. Nights he feared he couldn't top his previous performance. But he remembered that small bedroom. He remembered why he started. And every time he stepped onto the stage, he sang not for fame, but for the boy who once dreamed of being heard. Social media exploded with clips of his audition. Millions watched. Comments poured in from across the globe. People wrote about how his voice gave them hope. How his courage inspired them. How seeing Simon Cowell's rare reaction proved that true talent still matters. Mateo became more than a contestant, he became a symbol of possibility. On the night of the finale, the stage felt different again. Bigger. Brighter. More intense. Mateo stood there not as the nervous boy from the Philippines, but as an artist who had earned his place. When he sang that final performance, it wasn't about impressing anyone anymore. It was about gratitude. It was about honoring his journey. And when the final applause echoed through the hall, it felt like a full circle moment, like every struggle had finally found its purpose. Mateo's story reminds us that greatness does not depend on where you start. It depends on how fiercely you believe. It depends on whether you're willing to stand under the spotlight, trembling but determined, and give the world your truth. Simon Cowell's rare reaction wasn't just about a powerful voice. It was about authenticity. It was about heart. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Somewhere out there is another Mateo. Another dreamer practicing in a small room, wondering if anyone will ever listen. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own dreams, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove the impossible can become reality. Because sometimes, all it takes is one voice to leave the world speechless. From the very moment Mateo stepped onto the stage, something electric filled the air. The lights were brighter than the sun, shining down like they were trying to carve his silhouette into the memory of everyone present. The audience buzzed with anticipation, a mix of curiosity and excitement, but Mateo felt a stillness inside, a quiet determination that he had spent years building. His fingers tightened around the microphone, and his heart raced so fast he thought it might escape his chest. He could hear the faint rustle of programs, the shuffling of chairs, and the low hum of conversations that slowly faded as he focused on one thing, his dream. This wasn't just an audition. This was a chance to prove that all the years of late-night practice, all the sacrifices, and every whispered word of doubt could be transformed into something unforgettable. He remembered the small room where it all began, walls plastered with posters of Elvis Presley. That room had been his sanctuary, his stage, and sometimes his only friend. He had stood there countless nights, hairbrush in hand, eyes fixed on the mirror, singing until his voice was raw, until tears streaked his face. He had imagined the roar of the crowd, the lights, the feeling of everyone listening, not just hearing, but feeling every word. And yet, back then, even with all that passion, fear often crept in. Could he really sing like this in front of the world? Could the world care about a small-town boy with a big dream? Those questions had haunted him for years, but tonight, he had promised himself that he would sing, no matter what. The stage was enormous, dazzling in gold and crimson, a far cry from his humble beginnings. Simon Cowell sat at the judges' table, his arms crossed, expression unreadable, eyes trained on the young boy before him. Mateo felt a shiver. He had watched Simon for years on television. He was known for being brutally honest, for cutting people down with a single word if they didn't impress. And yet, Mateo wasn't thinking about fear anymore. He took a slow, deep breath, closed his eyes, and let his mind drift back to every memory that had led him here. The first time he had sung in front of his neighbors, the nights he had practiced until his voice cracked, the moments of doubt when he had almost given up. Every failure, every tear, every whispered encouragement had built this moment. Then he sang. The first note was soft, almost fragile, but it cut through the quiet like sunlight piercing a storm. The audience immediately leaned in, sensing something extraordinary unfolding. His voice carried more than just melody, it carried a lifetime of emotion, of longing, of hope. Mateo's tone was unmistakably Elvis, yet it held a unique warmth, depth, and vulnerability that made the song entirely his own. Simon's expression shifted imperceptibly, his eyes widening ever so slightly. He leaned forward, as if the music itself demanded his attention. Mateo didn't notice. He was no longer on the stage, he was in his room, singing to the mirror, singing to every person who had ever doubted him, singing to every dream he had quietly held close to his heart. As the performance progressed, Mateo's voice grew stronger, soaring with precision and emotion. He could feel the audience reacting, the gasps, the tears, the smiles. A young girl near the front was holding her mother's hand tightly, captivated. A man in the back wiped a tear from his eye, lost in the beauty of the sound. Mateo's fingers gripped the microphone, and his eyes fluttered open for just a moment to see Simon Cowell leaning closer, completely uncharacteristic in his reaction. The man who had seen it all, judged it all, critiqued it all, now looked amazed. And Mateo sang on, pouring every ounce of himself into the song, his voice carrying his story, the boy from a narrow street who refused to stay invisible, the teenager who had dared to dream bigger than life told him he could. He remembered the nights of self-doubt, when he almost stopped singing altogether. The nights when his parents worried and neighbors laughed at the audacity of his dreams. The mornings he woke before the sun, just to practice in silence. And yet, each struggle had strengthened him. Each obstacle had sharpened his resolve. As he sang, he felt the weight of all that history lifting off his shoulders, transforming into something powerful, something undeniable. This was more than a performance, it was a declaration, a testament to resilience, courage, and heart. The chorus hit with explosive energy, yet Mateo controlled it masterfully. Every note soared and trembled simultaneously, creating a wave that swept over the audience like a tide. People were on the edge of their seats. Some were crying openly. Some mouths were agape in disbelief. Cameras captured Simon Cowell's face up close, revealing the rarest expression anyone had ever seen from him, awe. Genuine, unmasked admiration. He wasn't frowning, wasn't ready to critique, wasn't planning a harsh word. He was listening, captivated, as the boy delivered something magical, something unforgettable. The final verse approached, and Mateo's body swayed subtly with the music, eyes closed, fully lost in the story he was telling through his voice. He remembered his mother's words, "Sing like the world is listening." And for the first time, he truly believed the world was. Every chord, every rise and fall, every trembling note carried years of persistence, hope, and love. The audience was hanging on each sound, hanging on his story, and hanging on the evidence that dreams, no matter how impossible, could come true. When the last note rang out, it lingered in the air, a suspended heartbeat. For a moment, there was silence, stunned, reverent, emotional silence. Then the applause erupted, deafening, overwhelming, shaking the walls of the theater. Mateo stood frozen, chest heaving, tears in his eyes, as the audience rose to their feet. Simon Cowell stood slowly, clapped deliberately, and finally spoke, "I've never heard anything like that." The words were simple, but heavy with meaning. Mateo's dream, nurtured in a small room, fueled by passion and belief, had been validated on the world stage. Backstage, Mateo collapsed into his mother's arms, sobbing quietly. It was a mixture of relief, joy, disbelief, and pride. Cameras captured the intimate moment, but Mateo barely noticed. He thought of every hardship that led him here, every note practiced, every doubt overcome. Simon came backstage too, offering mentorship, guidance, and encouragement. Mateo realized that talent alone could only take him so far. What mattered most was heart, courage, authenticity, and the willingness to give everything you had even when the world wasn't watching. As the competition continued, Mateo's story spread across the globe. Clips of his audition went viral, inspiring millions. Messages poured in from strangers, praising his voice, his bravery, and his authenticity. He had become more than a contestant, he was a symbol of hope, proof that dreams can come true with perseverance and belief. And yet, Mateo remained humble, grounded, remembering the streets he came from, the small room where it all began, and the family who loved him no matter what. Each subsequent performance carried even more depth, more emotion, and more connection. He sang not for fame, but for every dreamer who had ever been told they couldn't achieve what they wanted. Finally, the night of the grand finale arrived. The lights blazed, the audience roared, and Mateo stepped into the spotlight, no longer a nervous boy, but a young man who had grown with every note, every round, every challenge. His performance was flawless, but it was more than that, it was a story, a journey told with heart, soul, and voice. Judges were on the edge of their seats, audience members were on their feet, and Simon Cowell's face revealed admiration and awe in a way few had ever witnessed. When Mateo took his final bow, the applause shook the theater. The cheers, tears, and laughter created an unforgettable moment, one that would stay in the hearts of everyone who saw it. Mateo's journey teaches us that greatness does not come from luck or starting points. It comes from courage, perseverance, and a heart willing to chase the impossible. It reminds us that no matter where we begin, no matter how small or uncertain our world, dreams are worth pursuing. And for anyone watching, the message is clear: believe in yourself, sing with your heart, and never stop chasing what you love. Mateo's voice changed the world that night, not just because it was beautiful, but because it carried a story of hope, resilience, and courage. So if Mateo's story touched your heart, inspired your dreams, or reminded you that anything is possible, like this video, share it with someone who needs hope. And subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove the extraordinary exists in ordinary people. Because sometimes, a single voice can stop the world, make everyone pause, and remind us all that dreams do come true.